on Online for Authors. I'm talking with Ally Machate, owner of The Writers Ally, about loyal fan bases and long-term brand equity. Welcome, Ally.
Thank you so much for having me, Terry. It's great to be here.
Before we really dive into this whole thing about fan bases, long-term brand equity, all things that make, me sweat just thinking about terms like that, let's give just a quick introduction into you and why you are the person to talk with us about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Terry, I am a lifelong book nerd. I have always loved reading and writing. Books have always been a huge part of my life. My mother loves to tell people that I started reading at the age of 3, and pretty much shortly thereafter was making little construction paper and crayon books that I would hand out to friends and neighbors, and I would tell them I was publishing books.
Yes. Well, you were. The early stages of book publishing, that's where you were.
That's right. The very early stages. So it's really been that long, and all through my academic career, I did all the school paper and lit mag and yearbook and all that kind of stuff. And in college, I was fortunate enough to get an internship at a small regional book publisher. I had also just started freelance writing. The internet was just opening up, to date ourselves a little bit. Yes. There were lots of opportunities, and I started freelance writing for pay. And of course, coming out of school, I was incredibly fortunate to land my first job with one of the big 5, with Simon Schuster in New York.
So absolutely. So you do have a little bit of credibility here. What is it that you're doing now?
Yeah. So fast forward several years, the self-publishing world started to erupt. We had print-on-demand technology come out. We had ebook technology come out. And I really found that there were a lot of authors out there who desperately needed people they could trust. They needed people who weren't scammers. They needed people who would provide good quality services. At the time, I was a freelance editor, and I wanted to help people not just edit, but see them through all the way to publishing the book. And so I started the Writers Ally, and I put together my own team of publishing professionals. So we now work with authors, nonfiction, fiction, and memoir, everything from children's picture books, middle grade YA to adult. As long as it's for a commercial audience, we help with developing manuscripts and then all the way through to production and marketing.
Fantastic. And so today we're going to kind of focus on that marketing aspect of it. One of the things that we had talked about prior to really sitting down was what we could discuss. And you had said loyal fan bases and then a long-term brand equity. And my thought is those things make creatives kind of cringe a little bit, because a lot of authors that I speak to, they want to write the book.
Sure.
And then they want to be done with that, and they want to write their next book. And there's something really lovely about that idea, but it's also not very realistic. I mean, you can do that. You can write a book, and you can write your next book, and you can write your next book, but no one's going to know they're there in a field of millions of books yearly that are now available to people. And so I have found personally that the gatekeeper is now marketing. It's, can you get your book to rise above the bubble of all of the other books that are out there? How do you make yours stand above it? So define what you mean by a loyal fan base.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that you're looking at marketing as the new gatekeeper. That's a very interesting perspective. I'll have to think about that, but I think you're right. So loyal fan bases, it is, as you say, many people, when they first get started, it's because they have an idea. They have some story idea that struck them, that they're passionate about, and they're like, let's go write that book. Let's go write that idea. Hopefully somewhere along the way, hopefully before they've finished it, they learn some more about what it actually takes to connect with readers. Because ultimately, as you say, anybody can write a book. These days, it's pretty easy. You can upload the file, press publish, and voila, you technically have a book available for sale. Right. But if you actually want people to read those books, and you want them to review your book well, and you want these things because if you plan to publish more books, of course, the next book they're going to look at, well, how did your first book do? Did anybody buy it? Did anybody review it? Did anybody like it? Right? So you can publish as many books as you like. If you don't care that anybody reads them, you don't have to think about anybody but yourself. That's not where most people are. So a loyal fan base is really just about understanding who your target audience is for the type of book you want to write, making sure that you're delivering on those category tropes, making sure you're giving the audience what they're looking for. If you tell them my book is this kind of book, make sure you're delivering on what they expect that kind of book to look like. And you want to be consistent about it. If you're delivering a consistently exciting, engaging, heartbreaking, whatever the type of story is, experience to your readers, and you have some effective back-end processes, and this is where a lot of authors fall down, is that you also want that way to sort of capture those folks so you can nurture those relationships. So you can tell them when the next book is coming out. So you can get them to join things like your launch team and help you boost the signal. Those readers will stay with you from book to book if you do that.
So what would you say to authors who say that my audience is everyone? I write to everyone.
I hear that all the time. That's a really common belief that people have. And I think it comes from the idea that, of course, when you create something, you want as many people as possible to experience it and to love it. And so I think that new authors make this mistake of thinking, well, if I've written something everybody can enjoy, that's how I will get the most number of book sales. That's how I will reach the most number of people. But the truth is, when you're trying to talk to everyone, you're going to connect with no one. And that's because not everyone speaks the same language per se. And I don't mean literally English versus another language, but the people who read a horror novel are not the same people who read a sweet romance novel. Right.
And though there are people who read both, when you're, especially in the marketing process, you speak to someone who is in the mood for the horror novel will be different than how you would speak to someone who's in the mood for a sweet romance. You can't market the same way. So
yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And it's a matter of percentages. When you think about, like, let's say there's 1,000 people and you're saying, well, my book is, everyone can enjoy my book. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this other thing. You're going to get such a tiny percentage of people paying attention because they're not going to be clear on whether or not this book is actually for them. Is this the kind of book they really want to read? So yes, you can target 1,000 people badly and get a very small percentage. But if you have 100 people and your book is perfectly tailored to precisely the kind of book those 100 people like to read, and you get 80%, 90%.
Exactly.
Right? So you still end up connecting with more people when you get very narrow and specific about your book. It's actually a little counterintuitive as from a book marketing perspective.
I agree, but that it's counterintuitive when you first think about it. But the more you think about it, it's almost like you need to oversaturate a really small market and get all of them. And then maybe you can consider branching out a little, but you need to start someplace. I've noticed for me, like locally, I am now known in my little teeny tiny town. I tell everyone I'm a big fish in a teeny tiny pond. And that's wonderful, but I can go 10 miles outside of here and no one has heard of me. And so, that's where I started next was, okay, well, now I'm going to start doing some things a little bit outside of my little tiny pond. And it would be the same thing, not just geographically, but in terms of your readership and what you think, so if you're one of these authors, and a lot of authors now do these cross genres where it's a lot of things, and maybe would you recommend like picking a genre to do your thrust of your marketing in and then maybe open it up to others?
Yeah, generally speaking, it is much, much easier to connect with and build a loyal fan base if you're very clear about who that fan base is. So getting really narrow, first the broad category. Is it a mystery? Is it a thriller? They get lumped together a lot, but they're not exactly the same thing. What kind of romance is it? Like, get the big umbrella first and then get even narrower. Look at who else, what other authors out there are writing books for the kind of people that you think would like your book. Get as narrow as you can. And when you get really, really clear about who those people are, it's much easier to publish 1, 2, 3 books in that same category. It's great if it's a series. It doesn't have to be a series. But once you start putting in the work to attract a certain type of reader, you want to be able to give them more of what they're looking for. So if they like what you have, they get some more of it. Now, a lot of authors like to write in, like you said, cross genres, but the key to cross genres is still picking a predominant category. It's not just a mishmash of, 5 different types of books that you like to read. That's not really a cross genre book. That's kind of just a mess, to be honest.
I agree. All right. If you had to give an author like 3 top tips for developing their fan base, what would those be? What would you suggest?
Well, first of all, I would think really hard about, as we said, precisely the type of book that it is. So going narrower than that broadest category. If it's a romance, what kind of romance? If it's a fantasy, what kind of fantasy? Subcategories are become increasingly important, especially because sites like Amazon really use those keywords to help clue people in to the kind of book it is beyond those big umbrella categories. When you went to the bookstore, it was just, right? It was just the romance section. When you're on Amazon, it's the sweet romance, the Christian romance, the spicy romance, the, what have you.
Right.
So being really clear about who your books are for, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is doing a deeper dive into what that actually means. And that really means looking at tropes. So every category is really defined by its tropes. Those are the little elements and aspects of your story that make a reader really know this is the kind of book they love. For example, I've been rewatching the Bridgerton series, which I know is a television series, but it's based on a book. It has mastered what we call the enemies to lovers type of romance story arc, right? If you love enemies to lovers romances, there's an entire subcategory of that type of book. Right. But to make that work, you have to hit certain key elements of the story. Readers who read enemies to lovers romances expect to see certain plot points. They expect to see characters with certain types of personalities. You need to hit those right notes and include those tropes to please the people that you're targeting as your loyal readers. So once you know exactly who you're writing for and exactly what kind of story elements they're looking for that you need to have into your story, the third real key to building a loyal audience from book to book is to have some kind of container. So you want to make sure that you have, at minimum, a simple website with what we call a reader magnet or a lead magnet and an opt-in. So those forms that you've probably seen on other people's sites where it says first name, email address, get the free thing. That's essentially what you want as well. And you want to make sure that your books have a mention of that link to send people back to your site, because Amazon doesn't give you a list of the people who buy your books. And Absolutely. You really want to be able to nurture those relationships from book to book. So you need some way to bring them together. Social media doesn't quite cut it. It's really about the email list.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, I was the author that got my first book out, put it on Amazon and said, why is it not selling? And I had to start, I went backwards. So I had to book and then I had to figure out how to get people to see it. And I learned and really do believe that the newsletter is one of the most important things that I have, because I currently have 1,100 names. And those 1,100 people are mine. Like, I can talk to them whenever I need to talk to them, and I can let them know whatever it is I need to let them know about my writing. And it has really changed the first book from the third book. There was a big difference in what that looked like, because I had a machine behind me. So I completely agree with that. Now we're going to talk about something that I don't know as much about, which is what you're calling long-term brand equity. And I can tell you that when I hear that term, I want to crawl under the table and cry. So what do you mean by it? And maybe once I know the definition, I won't feel quite so intimidated by it.
Well, I looked up a formal definition before I came on here because I knew you were going to ask me. And of course, it has now flown directly out of my head. But I can tell you what it means. Essentially, when people are talking about long-term brand equity, they're talking about things like assets, or borrowing language from like the financial and the real estate.
Right. Which is why I want to crawl under my desk and hide. So
for sure. All it really means is that it's an extension of what we were talking about as far as building the audience, that you're also looking at your books in a sort of holistic way from a branding perspective. So what does that mean, branding? Related to the types of books you're writing. Let's say, for example, that you're writing horror novels. when you go to the website of a horror novelist, you don't see bright pink and lots of colors and, beautiful pictures of butterflies, right?
Let's hope
Let's hope not, right? You see moody colors, darker colors. You see images that evoke shadows and fearsome things, maybe even literally weapons or blood, depending, right? So that sort of gives you, it's the feel, it's the emotion, it's the things that when someone sees one of your book covers, they see your name or your title, your branding evokes an impression of what it is that you deliver in an emotional way. So you can look at a horror novelist's book cover. You don't need the title. You don't need to know what category it is. You know exactly what kind of book it is.
Right.
So building that long-term brand equity is about building up those assets in a way that's really consistent so that everything you add to it reinforces that brand and it becomes memorable and recognizable to the author. So definitely cover design is a really key part of that, but also how you've done your website, what your social platforms look like, and what kind of content you post on your social platforms. It's things like how you communicate with the people on your email list, what you're saying to them, the tone of what you're saying to them. It's about having reader magnets for different projects or different types of events. It could even be, if you do in-person events, it could even extend to things like literal signage or table decorations, right? All of that contributes to the power and the value of your brand over time. And think of that equity in the same way that you build up equity in your home, you accumulate, money. Your brand equity is building up that loyalty, that recognition, that connection with people, so that when the right people see those pieces, those assets, it triggers an emotional response that, first of all, they're connecting with the type of stories that you write. They know they love those types of stories. And hopefully, more importantly, they see your name, just like if they see Nora Roberts or Stephen King or any big author, they get excited because they know, oh, this is for me.
Yeah, like I know this. Okay, so that isn't quite as scary when I hear what you say, because I think that I know that it's hard. In my first book, I had the title was Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, and everything I did was sunflowers. Except I wrote a second book that had nothing to do with sunflowers. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I had made a drastic error, which was created a sunflower motif that I couldn't follow through with because the rest of my books didn't do that. Right. So I went to something that was a lot more, I write a lot of historical fiction, and I went to something that was, more historical feel, but it also kind of lost its appeal with me. I ended up going with more of a color and my picture and some books, and you see that everywhere. And then when I do in person, I use the same color that's on my website. When I do my signage, it's the same color. Everything is out there, that color. And I think maybe I've kind of figured out where I want to land now, but I went through several iterations before I figured it out. One of the things that I see with authors is they try to brand their book. Mm. And I'm not sure that that's the right way, unless you have a really, really, really long series that you're going to be doing for a long time. How do you feel about that? Should they brand each book or should they brand themselves?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think you're exactly right. Unless you are someone who already knows you are going to be working with one particular series where you're 100% committed to that type of book, then, yes, you can lean into that brand because it theoretically would work for all of the books. But generally, I always encourage authors to think of themselves as the brand. The book isn't the brand. It's you as the author. So like when authors ask me, well, I've set up a website. I don't know my book's title yet. What should the URL be? And I say the URL should never be your book's title. It should be your name.
It should be your name. It should be your name. Right. Okay. So that's what I have done. And then with that, because I've also started now a podcast, I put my podcast on my website. And when I do other things that are book related in any way, I put those on my website because I'm the brand. And so you kind of do recommend that idea of you are the person that you're selling, and then you have these products.
Yeah, and you can parse that out depending on your situation, so for somebody who I apologize, Terry, I don't know if you do this, but if you have a bunch of, let's say, coaching products, maybe you have a program and a membership and a course, you still would want your books promoted on that same page. But there are cases where if you have a lot of different things going on, it would not be a terrible idea to have secondary pages. So while you still might have the primary domain as your name, people who know you go to find you to see all the things you're doing, it would be okay to have a second page that say, for example, is, Terry Brown author, or even to have a page, as you mentioned, about your sunflower book. Sometimes authors will have a page that is devoted to one book with a URL devoted to that book. Right. But they're all still connected back to one main page. The real key is that you don't want to build up an audience for one book and then have to start all over again when you write the next.
Yeah. And that's what I realized I was doing was, oh my gosh, I didn't think about book number 2. I was so involved, which I think happens a lot with first-time authors. You get very, very involved. So tell me a few things that we should do as authors that help build this brand equity. You did talk about, like having the website and, making sure that everything seemed even, like if you're doing horror, everyone knows you're doing horror. What are some other things that we can do that will really help us with this brand equity idea?
So book covers are probably one of the easiest wins in this type of effort. And we've all seen them, the authors who publish book after book after book, whether it's a series or not. And you can tell from 20 feet away whose book it is, right? Michael Crichton's book looked like Michael Crichton's. James, what's his name?
Patterson.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. James Patterson's books look like James Patterson books. He uses the same blocky font, with all of his titles. So the book covers themselves have a certain look. That's a branding thing. If it's using the same font, if it's using a similar layout, if it's using similar color schemes or an image type, there's a trend right now in, what we'll call women's fiction, for lack of a better term, because I hate that term, but, commercial fiction that is designed for women readers. There's a trend where all of the covers sort of have these sketchy looking images. Right. They're not pictures of people. They're illustrations with fun colors and objects, but they're very simplified and stripped down. Right. So nailing a look is a big part of your brand. And the more books you have, the more obvious that brand becomes when you can see a whole bunch of them, in a list. That's really important. We talked about the website, any assets, your social media platforms should also carry across from whatever you're doing on the website to look at everything. And, even little things like we talked about that reader magnet. If you're creating some kind of a PDF that readers are going to have, like, even if it's something, let's say it's an early chapter, a sneak preview from your next book, like, don't just take a PDF of a Word document, right? Like, make it nice, design it up a little bit, put a cover on it. It doesn't have to be locked in stone. Don't worry that your readers are going to see that. And then a year from now, when you finish the actual book, they're going to be mad if you've changed things. First of all, they probably won't remember. And second of all, they understand that it's a work in progress. It's a sneak preview, but give them something nice. Give them something that looks like the rest of your assets.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Are there pitfalls that you would say to an author, here's some things you need to avoid in your marketing, because if you avoid these, you're going to do so much better in the world? What would those be?
Yeah, I think understanding the tropes is a really, really important piece, because it plays into not just how you've written the book, but how you've also written your sales copy. So, on Amazon and other sites where it says book description, people often fall into the trap of thinking it's just a summary. That's not a summary. That's marketing copy, right? That's sales copy. That's where you want to include those keywords, those buzzwords that relate more specifically to the tropes, to the type of story twists and turns that are going to be unique to your category, subcategory, what your readers want to see. There's a really wonderful book by Chris Fox that talks about writing to market. And it really explains this idea in deep detail of how to understand the relationship between the tropes and those buzzwords and producing the kind of book that those readers really want to see, and just having everything in alignment. It makes all of your marketing that much easier. So, a pitfall would be falling into the trap of not knowing what those tropes are, just assuming that people are going to figure it out on their own. If you just, give them a summary of the story, that's definitely a mistake. People are impatient, they're skimming, they're looking for keywords to pop out at them. You want to make sure you know what those keywords and phrases are. Excuse me. And I think also, a lot of people in the indie space, because they get started writing from a place of inspiration, and not always a place of strategy, sometimes you end up with one of those books, as you said, that people struggle to define. Well, anybody, who's it for? It's for everybody. What kind of book is it? Well, it's got a romance, and it's got a mystery, and it's got a this, and it's got a that. So making sure that you have spent some serious time looking at the kind of categories and keywords that are available to you in Amazon, looking at what other books like yours, books that you can identify as being for the same type of reader, see what kind of categories and keywords and things that they're using on their site. And if you truly, truly cannot pin down some proper categories and keywords to describe your book, then I would say one of the biggest pitfalls is publishing that book and just thinking people will like it and find it. It is almost impossible to market a book like that. And often what ends up happening is actually you get bad reviews because people come to it. And if you haven't made clear what kind of book it is, they sort of make assumptions or project their own ideas onto whatever copy they're reading. Then they get in and read your book and it's not what they expected. It's the fastest way to a bad review.
I absolutely agree. I know that as doing what I'm doing, I talk to a lot of authors, I read a lot of indie books, and I have been surprised at the number of times where the copy that I was sent to tell me about the book I was going to read, and then the book that I read, sometimes I don't feel like we had a match.
Yeah.
Like I was very surprised. Oh, well, I didn't know that's what I was going to get here. And it's okay with me because I'm going to have the author on and we're going to have a nice chat about their book. But it wouldn't be as okay if it were someone who was out paying for the book, who spent the time to start reading it and then said, this isn't what I wanted.
Exactly.
What do you think about making sure that people understand like spice levels and things like that? How important is that on the back of a book, in a way that lets people know what they're actually going to get? For instance, like in terms of a romance, how important is it to know whether it's clean and sweet or whether it's spicy or whether it's whatever?
It's really important. And that similarly goes for things like levels of violence, graphic violence, how descriptive you're getting. I guess we can kind of call them trigger warnings in a way. That's become a term that's really popularized. But the idea is, again, about expectations. You don't want to catch somebody unaware. And it's about really understanding your readers. People who read sweet romances do not want to read, very explicit, spicy erotica. They're not the same readers. And again, that's the fastest way to a bad review, is to miscategorize and mislead readers into what the book is. So you want to make sure that you're using, if there's, a chili pepper icon or just even not verbally, but in writing, explaining this is a very hot and spicy, or, using terms like erotica or whatever it is that you want to use, be specific and make sure that you are describing it correctly.
Yeah, I agree. I read a book that I believed was going to be a very sweet type book, and it was very spicy. I'm a little bit prudish, so my, however many peppers I would have given it, maybe it wasn't quite that high, but it felt that high to me. And I was in fact, I was reading it and then I kind of like looked around to see if anyone saw me reading it. I was so embarrassed by what I was reading on the page. And then it was like, oh, I hope no one is seeing me reading it, because it was, you know what I'm saying? So I agree with you.
In public.
Whoa. Yeah. Like I think I learned a few things, which was scary, but I just think that when you're reading a book, you want to know what you're going to get, at least to some degree. I have a little bit of problem, I think, with the trigger warnings when when you look and you see 86 of them listed, because, you know, there are so many things now that trigger people. And I think, well, you know, you've got to read the book. And if I give you all these trigger warnings, then you might as well not read it. You now know all the things that are going to happen. On the other hand, I do think that you need to give enough description that someone on their own can recognize this might not be the book for me.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Certainly it can be overdone. And as you said, you don't want to cross over the line into spoilers.
Right.
But there are some, you know, it's kind of common sense to a degree. Explicit sex, not explicit sex.
Right.
Explicit violence, not explicit violence, right? Just some sort of broad things that, you know, you can think, I should just let somebody know that's in the book. Child abuse, rape. You know, there are certain types of things that people should not be exposed to or be caught unawares. You know, it's you can call it just sensitivity, but honestly, even from a pragmatic marketing perspective, again, fastest way to a bad review. Don't warn somebody that a book is full of graphic rape scenes and then they get that in their face on a Sunday morning and
now they're angry and now they write you a bad review and they say this book isn't anything like what I expected it to be, right? And so the expectation piece, absolutely. How could someone get in touch with you, Ally, if they wanted to talk with you more about this, they wanted to use your services, they said, oh my gosh, I need Ally. How do they find you?
Yeah, the best way is to come to our site at thewritersally.com. We have a number of great free gifts. We have a blog with lots of useful articles. And if you're ready, if you already have a completed draft and you want to talk about editing and book production, or if your book is published and you want to talk about marketing, we do work with people who have already published, even if they haven't published with us, then you can fill out the form to get a free book strategy call with me.
Oh, fantastic. So guys, all of that is going to be in the show notes. Definitely reach out. I've been to her website, seen so many of the things that she offers people. It's a really good resource for you. And from, like she said, from the editing all the way through to the marketing. And so if you're anywhere in this process and you feel like you're struggling, definitely reach out to Ally. And I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much again for having me. It was great.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.